Obese girl was rejected for being too fat on blind date, until the lonely CEO sat at the next table said, Samantha Lynn stood outside the restaurant, staring at her reflection in the window. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed down the front of her navy new dress. The fabric clung just enough to make her conscious of every curve, every place the world had once told her she should hide. Her long blonde hair was curled softly, tucked behind one ear. She had even worn lipstick, something she rarely did. It had been 3 years since her last date, 3 years since she had sworn off romance after a breakup that had left her questioning everything about herself. But tonight, she had decided to try again. A blind date. A chance. Maybe, just maybe, someone would see her for who she really was. The host greeted her warmly and led her to a small corner table with a flickering candle. She sat down, folding her hands tightly in her lap, trying to keep herself from fidgeting. She glanced around the restaurant. It was cozy, filled with soft music and the gentle clink of glasses. A couple laughed nearby. A family chatted 2 tables over. Then she saw him. Mike. He was tall, dressed in a crisp white shirt and jeans. Handsome in a way that made her stomach turn, not from attraction, but from nerves. She waved timidly. He stopped short when he spotted her. His face fell. He walked over, his steps slowing as if each one was a struggle. When he reached the table, he looked down at her with narrowed eyes, scanning her body from head to toe. His lips twisted. "I thought you said you were curvy," he said, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. "I was expecting smaller." Samantha's smile faded instantly. Her throat tightened. She tried to respond, but nothing came out. Mike pulled out the chair across from her but did not sit. Instead, he looked around, snorted, then said even louder, "Do they charge extra for people who might eat the whole menu?" A few forks dropped. Someone gasped softly. Samantha's face burned red. A woman at the next table gave her a sympathetic glance. A man shook his head in disgust at Mike. Samantha stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her glass of water. Her chest ached with embarrassment and rage and shame. She grabbed her purse, avoiding everyone's eyes, and turned to walk away, blinking back the tears that threatened to fall. She had almost reached the door when a voice stopped her. Calm, firm, deep. Don't let someone like that make you question your worth. She turned and saw him, the man who had been sitting alone at the table beside hers. He stood now, tall, confident, dressed in a simple gray blazer and open collar shirt. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and in his eyes was something she had not seen in a long time. Not pity, but fire. He stepped in front of her gently, not blocking her path, but making sure she would not walk out with her head down. She swallowed hard, her voice cracked. "You don't have to," but he had already turned. He walked over to Mike, who had remained standing at the table, arms crossed, looking smug. The room quieted. The man, Mark, stood just a few feet from him. "Being cruel isn't clever," Mark said, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "It's just cowardly, and everyone here sees it." Mike blinked. Mark didn't flinch. Silence. Then someone at a nearby table coughed. A woman murmured, "Good for him." Mike's face flushed red. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, and turned away, storming past Samantha toward the exit. People in the restaurant watched him leave, some with disapproval, others with open contempt. Mark turned back to Samantha. He didn't smile, didn't force anything. "You okay?" he asked softly. She hesitated, then nodded. He gestured toward her table. "Will you let me sit with you? Just dinner, nothing else." Samantha stared at him, unsure, her heart still pounding. But something in his voice steadied her. Something in his eyes told her he meant it. No games, no expectations. She slowly nodded. He walked back to the table with her, pulled out her chair, and waited until she was seated before taking the seat across from her. And for the first time that evening, the room didn't feel so heavy. Mark waited quietly as Samantha took her seat again. The candle between them flickered gently, casting soft shadows across her cheeks. She avoided his gaze, fingers clutching the edge of her napkin. He didn't push. Instead, he gestured to the waiter. "Could we get a fresh setting here? And 2 glasses of red, please. Something soft." The waiter nodded and cleared away the utensils Mike had left behind. A quiet pause settled between them until Samantha spoke, voice barely above a whisper. "You really didn't have to do that." Mark leaned back slightly. "I know. But I wanted to. No one should walk out of a restaurant feeling smaller than when they walked in." She gave a soft, ironic laugh. "That's funny, considering why he left." He tilted his head. "Why?" She gave a sad smile. "Because I wasn't small enough." Mark didn't smile. "Walked out because he's small, not you." Their wine arrived. Samantha took a sip, grateful to have something in her hands. The knot in her stomach slowly began to loosen. Mark opened the menu. "I don't know about you, but I'm starving. What do you say we order something real? No judgment, just food." She nodded. "Okay." They ordered pasta for her, steak for him. As the waiter stepped away, the air around them grew warmer. Not romantic, not yet. Just human. Mark glanced across the table. "You know, I wasn't always this calm in moments like that." Samantha raised an eyebrow. "Really?" He smiled. "First year of college. I asked this girl out. She said yes, and I thought it was going well, until I overheard her telling her friends she only said yes because she wanted to see if I could fit into the theater seats." Samantha winced. "That's awful." He nodded. "It was. I stopped dating for a long time. Thought I was the problem. What changed?" He ran his fingers along the rim of his wine glass. "A book, actually. Sounds cheesy, but one day I wandered into a used bookstore. The woman behind the counter handed me something and said, 'This one's been waiting for you.'" He chuckled. "It was a romance novel, The Garden in the Fog. Ever heard of it?" Samantha froze. Her fingers stilled, heart pounding. He didn't notice. He was lost in memory. That book, it wasn't just about love. It was about forgiving yourself, about not apologizing for the space you take up in the world. Samantha set her glass down carefully. "I remember one line," Mark continued, his voice softer now. "You are not less worthy just because someone else couldn't carry your weight with kindness." It hit me like a truck. She knew the line. She had written it. A faint smile touched her lips. "That's a beautiful line." Mark looked at her, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "You really think so?" She nodded. "I know so." He leaned back, watching her for a moment. "It's funny, I never thought I'd meet someone who understood me the way that book did." Samantha didn't respond directly. She met his eyes. Sometimes words find us long before people do. They held the gaze a moment longer before the waiter returned with their food. For the first time in years, Samantha ate without apology. The food was good, but the company better. They talked about literature, childhood, and always feeling like the extra character in someone else's story. Mark shared how books had been his safe place. Samantha admitted she used to write stories for imaginary people who wouldn't laugh at her for being different. When dessert was offered, they both declined, not because they were full, but because neither wanted to break the rhythm of the conversation. When the check came, Mark waved it off. "My treat," he said, "for the courage it took just to show up tonight." Samantha gave him a small, grateful smile. And for the first time in a very long time, she walked out of a restaurant, not trying to disappear, but believing that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally seen her. The bell above the bookstore door chimed softly as Samantha stepped inside, the scent of paper and old wood wrapping around her like a familiar hug. This place had always been her sanctuary, before the world knew Amelia Rose, before the late-night writing sessions and the letters from readers. Here, she was just Samantha Lynn, the girl who loved stories. She wandered past the new releases, past the aisle with the display of romance novels. Her eyes glanced quickly over the cover of The Garden in the Fog, her own book, now tucked behind a glossy bestseller. A part of her still struggled to believe that something born from her quiet pain could mean anything to others. Then she saw him, Mark, standing across the aisle, a book in hand. He had not seen her yet. His brow was slightly furrowed in that thoughtful way she remembered, and he was flipping through pages with a kind of reverence. She took a quiet breath and started to turn away. But then he spoke. "This author," he said aloud, more to himself than anyone, "she writes like she's lived through every kind of heartbreak and still found a reason to love people." Samantha froze. He turned his head, caught sight of her. A flicker of surprise, then warmth. "Samantha?" She smiled nervously. "Hi." He held up the book. Amelia Rose in gold letters across the front. "You know this one?" "I might have heard of it," she said, trying not to blush. He smiled. "I've read it 3 times. Every time I feel like I'm in a place I can't climb out of, I go back to it. The way she writes, I've never met her, but somehow she gets it. She gets me." Samantha's heart thudded against her ribs. "Maybe you will meet her someday." Mark's smile widened. That'd be something. They stood in a moment of shared silence, surrounded by stories written by strangers, but suddenly feeling not so alone. "Coffee?" he asked. She nodded. They walked to the small cafe tucked into the corner of the bookstore, a quiet place with soft jazz playing in the background and warm light spilling from copper lamps. They sat across from each other. No candles, no pressure, just coffee and conversation. They talked about books. Samantha recommended a few lesser-known titles, and Mark spoke about the first novel that made him cry. They talked about loneliness, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet ache that settles in when you feel like you're too much or not enough for anyone to stay. "People think loneliness is being alone," Mark said, "but I think it's more like being unseen, like you're shouting but no one's listening." Samantha stirred her coffee slowly. "Or worse, like you're whispering and someone hears you, but they pretend they didn't." Their eyes met, no words needed. After a while, he looked outside through the cafe window. "There's a park nearby. Want to walk a bit?" She hesitated, then nodded. The sun had started to dip below the rooftops, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. Leaves crunched beneath their steps as they strolled along a tree-lined path. The city noises faded, replaced by the rustle of wind and the occasional bark of a distant dog. He did not try to hold her hand. He did not try to lead the conversation anywhere it did not want to go. Instead, he let her be, and that, more than anything, made her feel safe. They talked about childhood, about growing up feeling like the extra character in someone else's story. Mark told her about how his weight had always been the first thing people saw and the last thing they forgot. "I used to wish I could shrink myself into someone more acceptable," he said, "but then I realized I don't want to be acceptable. I want to be real." Samantha looked over at him, her voice soft. "I think that's the most beautiful thing anyone's ever said." Mark glanced at her, eyes gentle. "You ever feel that way?" "All the time," she admitted, "but I'm working on it." "My favorite saying..." A beat of silence. Then they both laughed. As they reached the park's edge, the breeze picked up, carrying with it the scent of distant lilacs. They stood for a moment, looking out at the skyline. "I'm glad I ran into you today," Mark said. "Me too," Samantha replied. "And if you've ever run into a moment like this, a moment that made you feel seen, don't forget to hit the hype button. Let's keep stories like these alive." Sunlight streamed gently through the tall windows of Mark's office. casting warm gold across polished floors and towering mahogany bookshelves. Inside glass cases rested first editions, personal letters, and time-worn pages from authors long gone. Samantha stood quietly before one shelf, her eyes tracing the spines. There was something sacred about the space. Mark had invited her just to show her the collection, no agenda, just trust. "You're the only person outside my family who's ever seen this," he had said, unlocking the cabinet. She smiled. "It feels like walking through someone's soul." He chuckled. "That's exactly what it is." When a call came in, Mark stepped out. Alone, Samantha reached for a leather-bound notebook that looked hauntingly familiar. Before she could stop herself, she had pulled it free. Her heart dropped. It was hers. A handwritten draft of The Garden in the Fog from years ago. Scrawled at the bottom of the first page, Amelia Rose. Behind her, the floor creaked. "Wait. Is that—" She turned. Mark stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the notebook. She took a breath, nodded. "I'm her. I'm Amelia Rose." Silence. He stepped forward, slowly, as if putting pieces together. His expression didn't hold shock or disbelief, but awe. Then, without a word, he pulled her gently into a quiet embrace. It wasn't dramatic or rushed, just grounding. "That explains everything," he whispered. "The way you write, the way you understand broken people. You're one of us." She didn't cry, but something within her softened. For the first time, she felt seen, fully, clearly, and not judged. They talked for nearly an hour. He asked how she'd kept it hidden. She admitted she was afraid. Not of writing, but of being seen outside the words, where she didn't feel beautiful or safe. Mark listened without interruption, and something inside her began to believe she might finally belong. But not everyone saw her the way he did. A few days later, at a private publishing event, Samantha joined Mark as his guest. The gathering was intimate, wine, laughter, soft jazz playing in the background. She stood near a shelf, sipping sparkling water, when she heard her pen name. Amelia Rose. The voice was familiar, Andrew, Mark's longtime friend and second in command. "So Mark is dating a romance novelist now," he said, too loudly to be innocent. "I pictured someone more polished, not so inspirational, Instagram aesthetic, you know?" Laughter followed. Samantha froze. She stood just beyond a partition, close enough to hear every word. The sting was instant and familiar. Memories rushed in, locker rooms, whispered comments on buses, her mother's sighs every time she looked in the mirror. The shame clung like a second skin. Quietly, she set down her glass and stepped out of the room. Mark found her minutes later. "I heard," he said, breath tight. She didn't ask how. She saw it in his face. "I told him to shut it," he said. "If he ever speaks about you that way again—" "It's not just him," she cut in. "It's the world, Mark. It's always been the world." He reached for her hand. "Then, let's change the world." Her eyes welled, not from anger, but exhaustion. "You've been kind," she whispered. "Too kind. But I'm not ready to be part of someone else's world when I haven't even owned mine yet." Mark opened his mouth, but she gently shook her head. "I need space," she said, "to figure out if I can still be me when people are looking." That night, she sent him a message. "You're everything I didn't think I'd find. But I need to walk alone for a little while. Not because I don't care, but because I finally do. About myself." She signed it not as Amelia Rose, just Samantha. The day after the message was sent, Samantha deleted her social media accounts. She did not announce it. She did not offer explanations. She simply disappeared, at least from the world that thought it knew her. No more author updates. No more reader Q&As. No more interviews about love from someone who was still learning how to give it to herself. In the quiet that followed, she turned inward. She started waking up early, before the sun stretched across the skyline. Mornings became sacred. She would lace up her old running shoes, wrap her blonde hair into a messy bun, and step outside into the hush of dawn. At first, her legs ached after just a few blocks. Her breath came in gasps, her chest tight with frustration. But she kept going. Not to be smaller, not to be prettier, not to prove anything to anyone, but because her body deserved to move, for her, not for them. She started journaling too. Each night, one sentence, just one, honest and raw. I cried today, but I still made my bed. I didn't cancel on myself this morning. I stood up after I fell. That's a victory. Day after day, she began to stitch herself back together, not with grand gestures, but with tiny choices. She started cooking again, learning what foods made her feel strong, nourished. She joined a small yoga class, where no one judged her for not being able to touch her toes. She stopped writing for others. For the first time in her life, Samantha Lynn, Amelia Rose, wrote only for herself. She filled pages with thoughts no one would read, paragraphs that did not need approval, words that didn't need to be beautiful to matter. And yet something remarkable happened. They were beautiful. Mark never pushed. He did not flood her inbox with pleas or long-winded explanations. Instead, each morning, like clockwork, Samantha would wake to a short message. Sometimes poetic, sometimes silly, always thoughtful. Wherever you're walking, I hope your feet feel lighter this week. The moon's been quiet lately. I wonder if she's waiting for your voice. If the world feels loud today, remember, you are allowed to mute it. Samantha never replied, but she read them. Every one. Sometimes with a smile. Sometimes through tears. Sometimes with the phone pressed to her chest, as if she could absorb the kindness straight into her bones. He didn't know how much it meant. Or maybe he did. Once or twice a week, Mark returned to the little cafe where they had once shared long talks and coffee that had gone cold from too much laughter. He always sat at the same table, by the window, with a book in hand, but rarely reading. Sometimes he saw her. She would stop in to pick up a new novel or a cup of herbal tea. She never saw him. But he saw her. He watched as she stood straighter, smiled more, as she began to glow from something far deeper than appearance. And he smiled, too, knowing that this wasn't his moment to intervene. It was hers. One Sunday morning, Mark went for a walk in the park near the cafe. He had a habit of doing that now, hoping, without admitting it, that he might catch a glimpse of her in motion, chasing something only she could see. And then, there she was, running. Her breath was steady, her stride determined. A playlist buzzed through her earbuds. Mark kept his distance, walking the path parallel to hers, unseen, until she tripped. One sharp misstep on a raised edge of sidewalk and she fell, hard, palms scraping gravel, one knee hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Mark stopped, breath catching. Instinct kicked in. His legs moved before he could think. He was halfway across the grass when she stirred. Samantha sat up slowly, wincing. She looked at her bleeding knee, brushed the dirt from her hands. Mark froze, watching. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a wrinkled cloth and gently wiped the wound. Then she stood, unsteady at first, then firm. And then she kept running. Mark stood in place, his chest full. She didn't know he was there. She didn't need to. He lowered himself onto a nearby bench, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and whispered to no one in particular. She doesn't need saving, she's saving herself. In that moment, he realized something he hadn't known until now. He loved her, not for who she had been with him, but for who she had become without him. 3 months had passed. The city was warm that day, brushed with the golden tones of late spring. Sunlight poured in through the tall windows of the downtown book venue, casting gentle light across rows of neatly arranged chairs and crisp white tablecloths. People filed into the room with quiet excitement. Readers, editors, journalists, young women clutching copies of books that had once saved them during heartbreak. They were all here for one reason. Amelia Rose was finally making a public appearance. For years, she had remained a mystery, her identity hidden, her words speaking louder than any photograph ever could. But today, for the launch of her newest book, she would step into the light. And then, she appeared. At the top of the short stage, emerging from behind the curtain, stood Samantha Lynn. Her golden hair was pulled back in a simple yet elegant ponytail. She wore a white dress, nothing flashy, just soft, clean lines that skimmed the gentle curve of her waist. She looked lighter, not just in frame, but in presence. Lighter like someone who had let go of what was never hers to carry. There was a stillness in the room as people turned. A few whispered. One woman gasped quietly. Samantha stepped up to the microphone with the kind of grace that isn't rehearsed. It's lived. "Hello," she said, voice steady. "My name is Samantha Lynn, but many of you know me by another name, Amelia Rose." A soft ripple moved through the crowd. Applause began, hesitant at first, then growing into something warmer, fuller, truer. "I spent years hiding," she continued, her voice never faltering. "Hiding behind a pen name, behind pages, behind fear. But I've come to understand something. Healing doesn't mean forgetting what hurt you. It means walking through the world without needing to prove you've earned your place in it." Every word hung in the air like poetry. From the very back of the room, near the last row, Mark stood. He hadn't said a word to her since the day in the park. He hadn't sent a message in over a month. He told himself that silence, this time, was not distance, it was respect. But now, as he watched her standing beneath the lights, his throat tightened. She wasn't the same woman he'd met at that restaurant months ago. She was more, stronger, clearer, and in that moment, he realized just how beautiful it was to watch someone become themselves. People around him murmured as they recognized her from the photo on the new book's cover. But Mark didn't say a word, he just watched. And when she looked out into the audience, scanning the faces, their eyes met. Only for a second, but it was enough. She smiled, not in surprise, in recognition, in knowing, because this time she didn't need anyone to validate her worth. She had already done that herself. The applause still lingered in the air as Samantha stepped away from the microphone and took her seat at the signing table. A long line of readers began to form almost instantly, some holding weathered, well-loved copies of her earlier books, others clutching the glossy cover of her newest release. She smiled at each person, took her time with every signature. For the first time, there was no curtain between her and the people her words had reached. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, voice trembling. "I used to read your books during chemo," she said. "You reminded me that I was still human, still worthy of love." Samantha looked her in the eyes and took both of her hands. "You still are," she said softly. "You always were." Next came a teenage girl with dyed green hair and chipped black nails. She looked nervous, almost ashamed. "Your second novel, I read it after a breakup," she whispered. "I was going to give up on writing, but you made me want to tell stories again." Samantha signed her book and added a small note. "Keep writing. The world needs your voice." Every story shared across that table echoed a quiet truth. Samantha's words had done more than entertain. They had healed. As the line began to dwindle, the event host returned to the stage with a microphone. "Before we close," she said, "Samantha has agreed to read an excerpt from her latest book, a piece that, well, it speaks for itself." Samantha stood again. She walked to the podium with the calm of someone who had learned to carry herself through storms. She opened the hardback copy to a marked page and took a breath. Then she read, and may laugh at you, for your weight, for your scars, for the chapters of your life they never cared to read. But they can never laugh loud enough to drown out the voice of someone who stood back up, who kept walking, because rising from pain, that is the kind of beauty they'll never understand. The room fell completely silent. Not a phone buzzed, not a cough or rustle of clothing, just her voice, and the truth of it. And then, soft sniffles. Someone wept quietly in the second row. A man wiped his eyes with his sleeve. A woman reached across her lap to hold her friend's hand. Samantha closed the book and looked up. "I used to think," she said, "that strength was hiding what hurt. Now I know it's showing up anyway." She smiled, not with the forced poise of a public figure, but with the warmth of someone finally at peace. The audience rose to their feet, not in excitement, but in reverence. A standing ovation for a woman who had once walked away from everything, only to return whole. The line had nearly disappeared. Only a few people remained, clutching their books, lingering in the warm hum of everything Samantha had just shared. She was still seated behind the table, gently closing her pen, when the final figure stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply placed the book in front of her, her newest novel, its cover still crisp and uncreased. She looked up, and there he was, Mark. Her breath caught. Their eyes locked. For a moment, the world fell away, the clapping, the murmurs, the faint buzz of lights overhead. All that remained was the space between them, filled with things unsaid and feelings held gently for far too long. "You saved me," Mark said quietly. His voice didn't shake, but there was a softness to it, a weight. "Twice." She blinked, unsure what to say. He continued, "Once with your words, and once with your silence." Samantha felt her eyes sting, a tear slipping free before she could stop it. Her heart beat so loudly it felt like it echoed in her ears. Mark leaned in slightly, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I don't care about the past," he said. "Not the one they see, not the one you hide. I care about you." He reached for her hand, gently, carefully, as if asking permission, not just for the touch but for something deeper. The way you fight, the way you write, the way you make broken things feel whole again. Samantha looked down at his hand, then back into his eyes. She smiled. Through tears, through memories, through all the moments that had nearly broken her. "You waited," she whispered. "I would have waited longer," he replied. The room around them blurred. Someone cleared their throat politely in the background. Someone else stepped forward with a camera, but neither of them noticed. She stood. Their hands remained intertwined as she came around the table. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just presence, just choice. And then, without a word, they walked together toward the door. The evening sun was melting through the glass panes of the storefront. Dust particles danced in the light, golden and soft, like a blessing from something unseen. They stepped outside, hand in hand. And for the first time, the light didn't just fall on her. It followed her, through all the silence, through all the pain, through all the chapters she had written in the dark. Now she was the story, and it was no longer one of survival. It was love. Real. Earned. Oh. The door shut gently behind them, the bell chiming once, a sound that somehow felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. And as they walked down the sidewalk, shoulders brushing, laughter slowly returning to their lips, the final words of her last chapter seemed to echo softly into the world. Somewhere along the way, she stopped needing to be rescued, because she had learned how to love herself. And that was where her happily ever after began. Sometimes, we don't need someone to save us, just someone to stand beside us until we remember how to rise. If this story touched your heart even just a little, know that you're never alone in your healing. At Soul Stirring Stories, we believe in quiet resilience, the beauty of becoming, and stories that truly heal. If Samantha's journey reminded you of your own, or inspired someone you love, please tap the hype button, subscribe, and help us share more soul-stirring moments. Because sometimes, one story is all it takes to light someone's way. Thank you for watching.